Okay, so first of all, let me summarize the calendar for the next this week, the prosecution of this week, the remainder of this week, which means that we don't have lectures anymore because tomorrow the Easter break starts. So first of all, my best wishes for a peaceful Easter break. And next week, as I already mentioned to you, I will teach on Thursday and Friday regularly. Okay? So basically next week we have 5 hours, and on Thursday please bring your PC. Okay? Next week. And then we get to about April 10, because Friday next week will be April 10. And the subsequent week, as I already anticipated to you, I will teach on Tuesday, April 14. And there will be no lectures on Thursday and Friday, April I think it's 10, 12, 14, April 16 and 17, okay? And then regularly the week afterwards, and at the end of the subsequent week, which means Friday, April 25, I think I'll be able to close the subject, to finish the lectures. And this is my plan. And if you agree, I may fix an appeal for the exam at the beginning of May, because we close on April 24. Unless you really want to make an exam before the end of April, which means the next week, I think the best thing would be to take 10 days in order to to make some studying, and I may fix an appeal at the beginning of May. And May 1st, I think it's on Monday, if I'm not wrong, which means that in the week before, between May 1st and May 6th, 7th, we can have a first appeal. And then I will propose 2 weeks later, if you wish, which means around May 20, and then a regular one, the official one, around June 10, which means that all of you who will take the informal exam during May will need to subscribe for the official appeal in June, and I will register the mark at that date. And of course you can subscribe and take the exam in June during the official appeal. Is that clear? Okay. If you agree, I will wait next week before fixing the dates in May and June. But next week I think I'll be able to do that. And if you want that we fix them now, I can do that. But I would prefer to wait because, maybe that we are late for one lecture, so it's better if I wait a little bit before moving forward. Okay, this is basically the situation. And now we move forward with the decision theory. And basically what we did so far is related to the use of Lagrange multipliers. And then I made a discussion with you about simulation methods. So basically, what we did so far, I think it's important to summarize it because we keep a clear picture of the situation. So far we assumed that we can write down a net benefit function for our decision, and we inspected an analytical solution for identifying the optimal decision, and then I discussed with you, without going into fine details, the simulation methods. But so far we assume that we can write down a benefit function, and as I anticipated to you at the end of the past lecture, we assume that this benefit function is known without any uncertainty. Now we have 2 issues that we need to discuss. The first one, which I already anticipated at the end of the last lecture, is what to do if the benefit function, the decision in general, the details are affected by uncertainty. Of course, you take a different decision because, think about a classical problem when you are driving a car and you have to take two different roads, and then you know with certainty the distance that you have to cover along each one of them. Of course, you may decide that you want to take the shortest one, or you may take a different decision if, for instance, you need to save petrol, and then it's not the distance that is important, but it may be important also the velocity and the elevation gain along the road. So if you know these details with certainty, you are certain about them, then of course you may inform your decision properly. If there is uncertainty in your knowledge of the distance that you have to cover and the elevation gain, of course you may take a different decision, because for instance, if you know that the distance is defined with limited uncertainty and the elevation gain is defined with a huge uncertainty, then you may discard the advantages related to the elevation gain, because you prefer to stay on the safe side and take your decision basing only on the data that are affected by limited uncertainty. So of course your decision is different. So this is our first issue that we have to discuss: how to objectively incorporate uncertainty into our decision process. And then there is a second issue that I believe it's very important that we need to discuss, which is related to how to take a decision when you cannot quantify numerically the outcome from your decision. The outcome from our decision so far has been the net benefit. And this is a number that you can quantify numerically. But think at the situation where, for instance, you have to evaluate the risk on the population, induced on the population, for instance, by building a dam. This is something that is difficult to evaluate numerically. Or, I mean, the consequences, the impact of a hypothetical dam failure cannot be easily evaluated, because you have to assign a cost to the human life and a cost to morbidity. Morbidity means the event of people getting injured after the impact of your decision, and etc. So these are situations, and even when you have to evaluate environmental impact, these are situations where sometimes you cannot give a numerical value to your decision. And another typical situation is when you hire, for instance, a professor in the university. There are several objective functions that are evaluated. One is, for instance, the quality of the teaching of the person. So you go back to the questionnaires of the students and you look at the performances. And this is a numerical outcome. And then you evaluate, for instance, the capability of the person to attract funding, research funding. And you look at the research projects that he gained in the past, and this is a numerical outcome. But then it is often evaluated the capability of a person to lead a research group. And this is something that you cannot really evaluate through a number. Or, if you really want to evaluate it with a number, you have, of course, to devise some methodology to convert into a number something that is not numeric. Another issue that is evaluated for a candidate at the university professorship is independence of the candidate, capability of the candidate to work autonomously without needing the supervision of a more senior person. And this is another issue that you cannot really evaluate numerically. So the second matter that I want to discuss with you is just given by these examples: how to take the decision when you cannot evaluate numerically the outcome of your decision. And this is the first item that I want to discuss with you. So let's postpone uncertainty and let me talk about this evaluation of decisions whose impact is not numerical, whose outcome is not numerical. And therefore I have to find an alternative to the maximization of a benefit function. And indeed the literature proposes one interesting alternative for evaluating these decision in these situations. Let me open now the file that you find on my website. Let me see, I make a try to connect, but in any case I have my USB stick. So, let me see, there are a couple of things that I need to delete. I'm sorry, I have a keyboard that is not working. Let me see if I can. Okay, here we are. Basically on my website, which I cannot visualize now because I don't have connection, there is a link that points to a topic that is called pairwise comparison. And if you click there, you download a zip file which contains these items. I think it's not easy to read here, but I will describe the content by words. First of all, keep into account that there is one more item that I added just 1 hour ago, which is a kind of document that explains what I'm teaching today. So today's lectures, besides being recorded, is also described in detail with one of these documents, and I will tell you what is this document. And I wanted to do that because I thought that this is a topic that is interesting, and I wanted to deliver a document where you can study on. And basically, what is this topic that I just mentioned, pairwise comparison? Basically, this is a decision process that can be used to evaluate alternatives. So it can be applied when the number of possible decisions is finite. So you have a finite number of alternatives. So if your decision is given by a real variable, a real decision variable, you need to discretize the variable to make the number of alternatives finite. But typically this decision process, pairwise comparison, is used when you have a limited number of alternatives to compare, and the comparison, the decision variable, is not really numeric. In general, it is not numeric, and a typical example that I'm going to show you, for instance, is the identification of the best place where to locate a dam. So basically your decision variable is not real because we will consider, for instance, 3 alternative locations, and in general is not given by a real variable. This decision process can be anyway used, even if your decision variable is numeric, but you need a finite number of alternatives. So basically, it can be used when the outcome of the decision is not numeric. Like the dam location, the outcome of the decision is not a number, is a site where I go and I build a dam. So it can be used, as I said, when the outcome of the decision is not numeric, but the number of alternatives should be finite. And if it is not, you have to limit your attention to a finite number of alternatives. And the spirit here is to compare the different alternatives according to a given decision criteria 2 by 2. So if you have 3 alternatives, 1, 2, and 3, then you compare 1 versus 2, and then you compare 2 versus 3, and then you compare 1 versus 3. And then, of course, you need to put together the outcome. And what is the rationale behind this idea? The rationale is that when you have to compare three alternatives, it may become difficult to compare all of them together. While when you compare just two alternatives, the situation is much simpler, the evaluation is much simpler. So if we found a method for making the comparison 2 by 2 and then to put together the outcome, of course, the assessment would be easier. And you already understand that the key issue here is how to put the outcomes together. And this is basically the subject of this lecture. And the pairwise comparison is part of a broader topic, which is called the analytical hierarchy process, where process implicitly is the decision making. This is called, identified with the acronym AHP. So the analytical hierarchy process is the broader context where you make use of pairwise comparison to take the decisions within this process. I will first make an example where the hierarchy is given by just one decision. And then I will show you an example where the broad decision is made up by a hierarchy of decisions. And the hierarchy also stands for these 2 by 2 comparisons. So basically you split a complex decision in a hierarchy of simpler decisions. This is a method that was proposed around the 80s of the past century, so it means about 35 years ago. And its popularity has been grown a lot in the past 10 years, and now this decision method, the analytical hierarchy process, is a classical methodology that is used in water resources management. So let me now show you with more detail the content of the file that I'm making available, the zip file. So first of all, there is this two printouts from Wikipedia. The analytical hierarchy process is excellently described in Wikipedia as well as the pairwise comparison. So in Wikipedia, if you look for it, there is, as I said, a description that in my opinion is very clear and excellent. And the 2 pages that you find in Wikipedia are printed out here as 2 PDF files. And of course, these files were printed a couple of years ago. Maybe that if you go to Wikipedia now, it has been updated because you see that, you know that Wikipedia is a dynamical content. But I just wanted to show you the 2 files that I printed out a couple of years ago. And I'm not using this file for driving this lecture today. I just wanted to show you that I think this is a nice reading. And the 2 files are a more general one, which describes the analytical or analytic hierarchy process, the philosophy, and etc., without giving any example. Or there is an example that is given, but it's not explained in detail. And you see this is the hierarchy of the decisions. I don't go into the details because I wrote a document, as I said, that it's basically based on the same concepts, but it's applied to a water resources management problem. So I'm not now going into the details of this file. So my suggestion is that you start reading my document, but then I suggest you to read also these ones. These are very easy readings. So this is the first printout from Wikipedia, another printout from Wikipedia. It's an example, and it's an example that refers to the enrollment of a manager. And again, start with my document, and then I think this is an interesting integration and reading. Basically, it doesn't say anything more, but it gives another example. Then there is my document, which will be, as I said, the driver of my lecture, and I think this is the starting point that you should use for your reference. One important thing, I brought this document basically today, and you know, it's still a draft. I consider it still a draft. While reading, if you see that there are inconsistencies or mistakes, just let me know. Maybe that we spot out also some mistakes now, today, and in this case I will correct it. So it's also a dynamic content. Then there is another couple of documents. This one, consistency PDF, I think it's not needed. It's there because it was necessary before, but now it's embedded in my document. So I don't think it's needed anymore. But it's there because I wanted to keep it for now. And then there is another document which is written in Italian. I'm sorry for that. This is just an example of application of this decision method to a real-world problem. It's just an example, you don't need it, and my suggestion is not to read it for now. It's just an information for you, because I think this is something that I have written for solving a real-world problem in this region. I think it may be interesting at the end of the story, but let's forget it for now, because you will also miss some concepts for at least another couple of weeks that are needed to read it. So for now, just forget about it. Okay, now let me go back then to the document that I wrote, and given that I'm sticking basically on this document, I think we should make an attempt to turn some light off. Otherwise, reading there is not easy. Okay, I think it's a bit better. Don't get asleep, but I don't think you run this risk. Okay. So let me just select from the other ones. And let me see if I can enlarge it a bit. Okay. So let's have a look here. Basically, this is a case study. I'm lecturing this method by using a case study as an example. I think this is the best way to do that, because you know, the textual description or description by words of this methodology is a bit complicated. It's much more complicated than the application. And so let me introduce the case study first. The case study is, as I mentioned to you, a decision that we have to take about where to locate a dam. And here I assumed that there are three possible locations given by three river cross sections. And this is the cross-section number. Usually when you take the survey of a river, you take the survey by surveying an assigned number of river cross sections, and usually these cross sections are identified with a numerical, with a number, with an increasing number from upstream to downstream. And basically here I assume that at the river cross section 10, 25, and 30, we have three possible dam locations. Keep in mind that when you decide to build a dam, there are a lot of information that you need to collect in order to identify whether there are opportunities for building a dam on a river. And then opportunities means that from a morphological point of view, you need a place where with a relatively small dam you can create, induce a huge storage upstream. Because if you need a huge dam for inducing a limited storage, of course, the cost-benefit ratio of the dam is not favorable. A place is favorable to dam building when, by building a small dam, you can induce a huge storage upstream. Typically, there are places where the valleys get very close over the river, so sometimes you really don't need a huge structure to close, to connect the two valleys, the two sides, and to build a dam. So this is the first evaluation that you have to make, and then you have to check if the geology of the site is favorable for building a dam, because of course a dam always involves some risk of dam failure, and of course you need some geological features in order to make sure that the risk is kept at an acceptable value. So you need some geological information. You need to know what is the storage volume upstream, the cost of the dam, and nowadays in particular you need extended information on the dam impact, which is not related necessarily to dam failure. It's also the impact of the dam on the environment. And important impacts are, for instance, the modification of the river flow regime downstream the dam, the modification of the sediment transport regime downstream the dam. There is a lot of attention today for the impact on the river ecology and on the wildlife, meaning fishes, and also the wildlife that is living, populating the sides of the valley, the hill slopes. Also, one thing that you need to consider is the possible submergence, inundation of towns, human settlements, and the inundation of forests, because this causes, of course, the death of the forest and therefore a relevant environmental impact. And another issue which is today considered with a lot of attention is the impact on the landscape and the skyline, meaning that today for tourism and for protecting the cultural heritage of people, we tend to keep the landscape, the visual appearance of the landscape as less impacted as possible. Because it has been proven that when you modify radically a landscape, there is an impact on the cultural heritage of people. Think about the place where you were born, where you spent your childhood. If you go there and see that it's completely changed, of course it's something that impacts your feeling and also the cultural heritage, because these sites, the cultural heritage of people is strictly related. And therefore, there is to landscape impact and increasing attention. So basically, a dam construction is a process that requires getting a lot of information on the expected impacts, on the risks, and the cost and benefit of the infrastructure that you are designing and subsequently building. I mentioned one thing, that is the modification of the sediment regime downstream. This is something that probably you don't realize how much is important. And if I find easily a picture, I show you what I mean to say. And I have some pictures that were taken along a river which is located close to here, where basically a very small dam was built, and I think I have some pictures. Just 1 second. I don't have an overall picture of the dam, but it's a small barrage. It's not classified as dam, because the height of the barrage is less than 15 meters, but the storage upstream, it was about 1 million of cubic meters of water. And basically this is a river where there is a very significant sediment transport, and by building the dams, the sediment transport was blocked by the barrage. And the result was that in about 10 years, the the reservoir was completely silted, which means full of sediment. And this was not the major impact. The major impact was downstream because the river started eroding the riverbed. Because if you remove the sediment transport, the energy of the stream flow, basically it's causes an erosion process. Because if you have sediment transport, the erosion process is balanced by the sediment deposition. If you remove the sediment transport by building a barrier, then you have erosion only. And the result is that in about, this was built in 1980, and in about 30 years, what happened is shown here. This is a picture from the dam to downstream, and you see that there is the bedrock that is now emerging. There is no more gravel downstream because the erosion basically took all the gravel away and the bedrock emerged. And here the riverbed had a bedrock and therefore there was not a significant erosion. But look at what happens, what happened downstream. This is okay, this is what happened downstream, and basically this is a kind of a canyon that is about 15 meters high, 15 meters, and was originated in about 35 years. So it's about 30 centimeters per year, and this is a kind of, I don't know how to say clay in English. We say argilla in Italian, I think it's clay, the translation in English. So this is clay, it's not a bedrock, because of course in the bedrock it takes more time to erode it. But with the clay, significant erosion was triggered and the stability of several bridges downstream was undermined. And I have other pictures. So you see that you see the canyon there, and you can make the comparison with the height of the canyon and the height of the trees. You see that there is a significant erosion that was triggered. And here again, these are the students. It was a visit with the students. Okay, that's it. So let's go back. So basically, in this case, I made the decision very simple, and in order to make it simple, I am assuming that the best location should be identified with respect to 4 criteria. So it's not just an economical benefit. In order to, to put ourselves in a more general context, let's say that there are 4 criteria. And the 4 criteria are the estimated cost, billion of euros. This is an hypothetical case study. The reservoir storage in millions of cubic meters. And then the environmental impact, and you see the difference between numerical indicators and textual indicators. So basically the first 2 criteria are numerical. So I am again in the case in which by using the Lagrange multiplier for each one of them, I could identify the best solution. I don't need to use the Lagrange multipliers, because if I look at the cost, I immediately identify what is the solution that leads to the lower cost. But in any case, let's see the difference between the numerical characterization of the decision and the need to characterize the decision by using a textual description. So the environmental impact, this is a very simple description. I quantify it by saying that for the first site there is a very heavy impact, and then there is let's say, midway impact and a limited impact because this site is located downstream. And also, let's assume that the 4th criteria is the landscape impact. And again, here the description is textual. We have a solution that doesn't impact the landscape, and then we have a limited impact and a more relevant impact. Now, the question is, given this information, and let's note that this is a very simple situation, what decision should I take? And in front of such a question, you would reply, it depends on the weight that you give to the cost, to to the need of having a huge storage, the weight that you give to the landscape impact. Correct, this is a correct decision. So we have basically to identify here, we have to make several decisions. A first decision is related to giving the weight to the criteria, and the second decision is to rank each alternative solution with respect to each criteria. So basically, given that I have 4 criteria, I have to perform 4 decisions for ranking each solutions with respect to each criteria. And then I have an additional decision. I have to give the weight to the criteria. So this is indeed a hierarchy of decision. And keep into account that it's not just your decision usually. It's a decision that must be taken by a plurality of people together with the stakeholders. Remember that transparency and clarity of the decision-making process is a founding principle of fundamental principle of modern water resources management. Okay, so now let's start with a very simple case. Let's forget the 4 criteria. Let's take just one of them. So let's first analyze the simple case where the criteria is just one. And this is what is written here. Let's examine the case where one criteria only is used to select the optimal site. And let's assume that the environmental impact is the selected criteria. And as I said, such criteria is not immediately related to a numerical benefit function. And therefore, I have to use an alternative decision-making process, which is the one that I am now explaining. And this is the hierarchy of the decision that I need to take. Basically, I need to characterize